This video introduces the student to classic sociological thought. Sociology as a discipline emerges in the 1800s. This is a time of tremendous social upheaval. First, we have what's called industrialization. Industrialization refers to the shift in work from being primarily farming to primarily industrial production. People go from working in small-scale agrarian production to large-scale industrial production. What goes along with this is urbanization, the move of people into cities. We need a concentrated workforce for industrialization. At the same time, we also see a shift from feudalism to democracy. Monarchies are declining in Western society, and increasingly it's thought that government should be voted upon. Finally, we have a shift from faith to science. People are turning to scientific reason, medicine, education, chemistry, biology, a range of sciences to answer questions that they once turned to religion to answer. Within this context, the idea of creating a science of people seemed fashionable. Could laws of social behavior be uncovered? Early sociology tended to be what's called positivistic. Positivism is the application of the scientific method to the study of the social world. Its goal was social improvement, but it's ultimately a failed philosophy. Auguste Comte is considered one of the fathers of sociology. In fact, he invented the term sociology and defined it as the study of society. He believed that we could apply the scientific method to the social world. Ultimately, sociology discarded this idea, but we kept the name. Some of the key ideas that he did give to sociology is the idea of social structures as enduring regular arrangements, and the idea of social dynamics or social processes as being a key aspect of the ever-changing world. He also thought that sociologists should be active reformers. Herbert Spencer is referred to as the second father of sociology. Like Auguste Comte, most of his ideas have been discarded and discredited. However, the object of study remains germane. Herbert Spencer was a founder of the school of social Darwinism. In this view, social evolution is taking place, and those who attempt to assist those in need are actually interfering with the social process. This is generally seen as a misapplication of Darwinism. Being best adapted to current circumstances doesn't make something better. Herbert Spencer did not conduct any empirical studies, and this is problematic because he had no data with which to back up his ideas. The ideas of Karl Marx are foundational to sociology today. Marx observed that class conflict is the driver of human history. He argued that changes in forces of production, technologies, undermine the old economic relationships and open up new possibilities. His primary example is the shift from feudalism to capitalism. In Marx's view, change occurs when contradictions within a system overwhelm it. Marx argues the driving force behind history is class conflict. He argues that, regardless of economic system, you really have fundamentally two opposing classes: the bourgeoisie, those who own and control the means of production, and the proletariat, or the exploited workers. The means of production refers to anything that can create more wealth. He argues that ultimately, exploitation will overwhelm the system, and the workers will revolt. Marx saw the conditions of most workers as those that produce alienation. Marx argued that most workers were alienated, an overall sense of dissatisfaction with their job, because, first of all, they didn't understand the process of production. Each worker was only given a specific task to do, and they didn't see the bigger picture. They were also alienated from the product produced. Having so little control over what they were producing, they felt no pride of ownership in what they had made. This also leaves them alienated from fellow workers. Other workers are not their compatriots, people from whom they can learn and to whom they can impart wisdom, but are rather competitors, people who may undercut them for the meager earnings or little overtime that may be available. And lastly, Marx argues, you become alienated from yourself. You fail to see yourself as a productive and capable being. Marx sees contradictions overwhelming a system as the primary motivator of change. Capitalism has many contradictions. A key contradiction of capitalism is that it requires an increasing rate of profit. While the laws of supply and demand dictate a stabilization of price, how is a company going to provide increasing profit? Marx argues that at some point this will require cutting input costs. Eventually, there's only one input cut that can be cut, and that's workers' wages. As a result, we'll see increasing exploitation. Marx is a social activist who advocates praxis, action informed by social theory. What drives Marx is the extreme exploitation of early industrial capitalism. There are few regulations that protect workers during this time period. No safety regulations, no limitations to the length of the workday, no overtime pay. Workhouse children are sold into indentured servitude. It's a very problematic situation. Unfortunately, these working conditions remain in many countries around the world. Marx's philosophy should not be confused with the way it was enacted in Soviet Russia or Maoist China. In Marx's view, the ideal would be a classless society. All contribute to and benefit from the public good, and all are able to explore and expand their horizons. Marx once remarked, "I am not a Marxist," when looking at how his ideas were being used. Another key figure in classic sociological thought is Emile Durkheim. Durkheim focused on the problem of integration in the industrializing world. Durkheim was interested in what glues or holds society together. He argued that two levels of socialization accomplish this: regulation and integration. Regulation gives us what our moral rules are, communicates to us these rules, and then enforces them. Integration is our sense of belonging, our connection to the group. This comes from what we do with others. Over and over, we enact things that exhibit shared beliefs, values, or norms. Durkheim is appreciated for his methodological contributions. Durkheim gave sociology objects of study. He clearly defined the social fact. For him, the social fact are structures, norms, and values that are external to and coercive of actors. He argued that this can be taken as a thing. By studying these empirically, not philosophically, by giving a defined course of action for studying those, he set us apart from biology and psychology as a science. Durkheim focused on problems related to social solidarity. One key concept he gives us is anomie, or normlessness. He looks at what happens when people lose purpose, or when it's not clear to them what norms are. He also gives us the term integration or unity to look at what connects us to others. Durkheim argues that social solidarity takes two forms. Mechanic solidarity is what you see in traditional societies. In this case, he argues that they are held together by having similar values, norms, traditions, and roles. Social cohesion is based on the fact that everyone's having basically the similar experience. Organic solidarity is what you see in the more modern world. In this case, we're held together by mutual dependence. I and my plumber, we may not share very much in our lives. However, he or she needs me to educate his or her children, and I need him or her when my sink is clogged. In this case, social cohesion is based on mutual dependence, and we tolerate other sorts of differences. Two key empirical examples of Durkheim's work are his study on suicide, in which he looks at how solidarity impacts what seems like a personal act, and the elementary forms of religious life, in which he looks at how religion shapes our daily life. In this study, he gives us the idea of the sacred versus the profane, the sacred being that which we consider holy or divine, that we set apart for worship, and the profane, that which we consider the ordinary or the everyday. Max Weber is another classic sociological theorist. He gave us a focus on meaning. Weber came up with the idea of Verstehen, or empathetic understanding. This is the idea of trying to understand what meaning subjects in a study are making out of something. This gives us more of a focus on ideology, and he sees ideology rather than economics or material conditions as the main driver of social change. The Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism gives us a critical example. In the Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism, Weber notes there's what he calls an elective affinity between Protestantism, and particularly the Calvinism that we see in the United States and parts of England, and industrial capitalism. He argues that industrial capitalism tended to arise in conjunction with Protestantism, and it didn't in other areas that had the same necessary preconditions, especially areas that were Catholic countries, or India and China. Weber was a prolific scholar whose work has influenced many different areas of sociology. Weber studied economic systems and gave us the idea of rationalization, a discussion and critique of the way that the regulation of efficiency without consideration for the interpersonal experience is now a feature of modern society. If you want an example of this, think about some of your experiences with our registrar's office. What goes along with this is the study of bureaucracy. Weber also gives us the idea of the iron cage. He argues that increasingly bureaucratic structures or organizations will take control over more and more of our lives, imposing more rules and rationalizations. Ultimately, this will lead to the problem of disenchantment. This is a loss of magic or a sense of enchantment with the world around us. Think for a moment how in a bad situation, somebody taking extra time to go beyond their job might really change things for you. By the same token, how someone following rules mindlessly has really made it something difficult for you. W.E.B. Du Bois brought race and race relations into sociology. He was both an academic and an active social reformer, and felt that very little progress was made to improve race relations during his lifetime. Jane Addams was influential in the founding of the social work area. She was the founder of Hull House, the co-founder of the NAACP and the ACLU, and championed an 8-hour work week and campaigned against child labor laws. In 1931, she was a co-winner of the Nobel Peace Prize. From these early scholars emerged several key schools of thought. A school of thought are scholars who share certain fundamental or basic assumptions. Usually they share common theoretical influences. People tend to be influenced more by Marx or more by Durkheim, rather than both. And they tend to have a similar approach to research methods. Within sociology, the classic schools of thought are structural functionalism, conflict theory, and symbolic interactionism. Of course, we've moved on from them. Structural functionalism is based on the work of Emile Durkheim and operates on the principle that society can be treated like a person. If one system becomes sick, it'll throw all of the systems out of balance. This view has largely fallen out of favor. The work of Robert Merton has still been maintained, however. Merton gives us the idea of manifest and latent functions. Manifest functions are what a system is designed to do. Latent functions are unintended or unanticipated consequences. Conflict theory is based on the work of Karl Marx. Conflict theorists tend to see conflict as the driving force behind history and focus on the problem of social inequality. Early conflict theorists limited themselves exclusively to class conflict, whereas later conflict theorists included ideology and the social world, as well as culture. Two key ideas in conflict theory are those of ideology and false consciousness. Ideology refers to systems of beliefs, attitudes, and values that maintain systems of power and privilege. False consciousness is the denial of the nature of oppression on the part of the oppressed when they fail to recognize the interests of the ruling class in their ideology. Can you think of ways that this may occur in our society? Critical theorists, sometimes referred to as the Frankfurt School, are a group of theorists who share Marxist origins, but also share a concern with culture, ideology, and hegemony. Critical theorists note how important mass communication and popular culture are, and give us ideas like that of culture industry and the idea of hegemony, dominance maintained through ideological control. Symbolic interactionism tends to be influenced by the ideas of Weber, in particular Verstehen. Symbolic interactionists focus on how meaning is made in the social world and how we communicate. Mead and the idea of the generalized other, the I and the me, and Cooley and the idea of the looking glass self are key ideas. Mead's generalized other is the norm against which we measure ourselves. It's how we imagine we should be in the ideal, and then we react to ourselves. Our I is our spontaneous or immediate response to others. The me is when we're measuring ourselves against others. It's learned through interaction. Cooley developed the idea of the looking glass self based on these ideas. He argues that when we're evaluating the self, we imagine how we appear to others, then we imagine how they would judge us to be, and then we develop a feeling, pride or mortification. Today, theorists fall into many camps: post-structuralist, postmodern, post-colonial, multiracial feminist, queer theory, critical race theory. All of these build on and respond to ideas of the early theorists.